I am Mother Milk, and this evening we are with Suzie. Suzie, introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Suzie Padbin-Benisti. I am a mother to 3 beautiful kids, an 8-year-old, a 8.5, 6, and 2, a little more than 2, and married to Ido. And I run a social policy think tank in Jerusalem. That's it.
Great, that's a lot.
I like to
That's
sing.
plenty. And share your feeding experience with us. Tell us what that was like for you.
So so first of all, the story goes way back because about 20 years ago, when I was 20 or 21, I had a breast reduction. And I remember, like, even back then, I was aware of, like, the importance of kind of trying to maintain the possibility of breastfeeding. And my surgeon at the time, understood. Like, I told her that was important to me, and she was a very, very good surgeon. And she came afterwards and she said, I left everything intact, and you should be able to breastfeed, and it should be okay. So I guess I kind of knew in the back of my head that it could be an issue at some point. And then my son Ariel was born 8.5 years ago with an induction. I ended up having, with all 3 pregnancies, something called cholestasis of pregnancy, which is this liver disease.
Oh, wow.
That causes like crazy itching.
For you?
For me.
Wow.
And it can cause stillbirth for the baby. So it's
dear.
very, very
Wow.
scary.
Yeah.
With him, I just had this like awful pain in like right here my entire pregnancy. So I didn't know what it was. And with the girls, it became clear like at 36 weeks with Noah and at 31 weeks with Aya. And then, so anyway, with all 3, I had them induced, which was already like a challenge in terms of the start.
Yeah.
And when Ariel was born, he had to be on a monitor, like in the Tinokia for the first 2 days of his life. And I had to go in there to feed him. And then I was like pumping and getting nothing out, like a drop, like pumping, really literally a drop, like pumping for half an hour. And then a drop. And there was no cuddling, and there was no, like, he was connected to machines all the time. And
was he in an incubator?
No, he was just connected to a monitor all the time, because he was having like moments where he was losing, where he was not breathing properly. Or like, and when so I was trying to feed him, and then they were telling me to give him like formula, and then they were yelling at me for giving him too much formula because he was like throwing up after his or like spitting up after his feeds,
like reflux.
Well, it ended up being something else. So eventually, like after a couple of days, I was able to take him home, and I brought, like, the first day I was home, I brought a lactation consultant. I really, really wanted to breastfeed. And I, basically I started like feeding, like I had this regimen, feed like a certain amount of time on every side, and then give him a bottle afterwards. And he was always spitting up. And also I just felt like he needed to feed all the time. And I took him to the doctor, and this doctor was like, no, the problem is you're feeding him way too much, and he should be on the breast 10 minutes on each side, and that's it. And he's like a week or 2-week-old baby at this point. And she clearly did not understand that somebody could have low milk supply.
Right.
So I remember these moments of like him just screaming, crying, and my mom was like, "Wow, this baby has a lot of character." And I didn't. It was my first baby, and I didn't know this is like totally not normal. Like, he should not be crying. He should feed and he should sleep.
Right.
And but it was very confusing because anytime we gave him a bottle, he would spit up.
Right.
So we're like we're like overfeeding him. What's not right here? And then at a certain point when he was about, there was one night when he was 2 weeks old where Ido let me sleep at night, and he gave him a bottle. And then when I woke up, he was like, I don't know, he spat up like the whole time. I think he was throwing up, but I don't know. And we called my brother, he's a pediatric cardiologist, and he said, well, sounds like he may have something called pyloric stenosis, but it's too early to diagnose it, and you're just gonna have to wait. And he said that, and then we forgot about it. And then
What is that?
I'll tell you in a second, because that's what it was.
I'm like, imagine my seat here.
Well, what it is there's a sphincter between the stomach and the intestine that gradually closes up over the course of the first 3 weeks of the baby's life. It can be more than that, to a point where actually you can fill the stomach, but then there's nowhere for the food to go, and they throw up and they end up projectile vomiting, but they're not digesting anything, so they can't actually grow. So, so basically,
because it like doesn't close.
It doesn't. It closes.
Oh, because
it closes. The one on bottom.
Right.
It closes.
Right.
And then nothing can go through, and then they end up just throwing up. So, so we got to a point where he was like 3 weeks old, and I looked at him, like he was in the crib, and I looked at him, and his cheeks looked
we're all like hollow,
skinnier, and he was crying, like he was miserable all the time. And I put him to sleep one night, and when I woke up in the morning, I checked his diaper. This is after like a previous time he had like crystals in his diaper, and I checked his diaper, and he was dry after 12 hours. I was like, this is not right. And I'm like on Google all the time trying to figure out what's going on. We ended up I didn't know at the time that you're just supposed to go to the hospital when you have with a baby that age. I took him to Terem, and Terem were like, no, we don't need to weigh him. I was like, please weigh him.
Terem is like emergency care.
Yeah, it's like urgent care. And they took him and they weighed him, and I was like, no, he's lost weight. And the doctor was like, that's a catastrophe. Go straight to the hospital. And we went to the hospital, and he was so dehydrated they couldn't get an IV in him. They had to do an IV in the jugular, and they thought that he had a milk allergy, and they were like, just feed him like to the formula. Right. They're like, just feed him, like just breastfeed him only, and we'll see what happens. And meanwhile, I'm like Googling and the symptoms and trying to figure out, and I come upon pyloric stenosis, and suddenly I remember what my brother had said a week before, and I say to the doctor, I think he has pyloric stenosis, and the doctor said, no, he'd be projectile vomiting if he had it. And I was like, well, from what I'm reading, and obviously they're like, what do they care about what a random
they're like, thanks, Dr. Google.
Professionals and they're like, no, he really would be projectile vomiting if he had that. And so I'm like, I'm only breastfeeding him, and the doctor comes in to check him, and he projectile vomits like in front of the doctor. And then after the whole thing, it turns out that this is what he had. Wow. And he had a surgery the next day. Oh, wow. And then he started the whole process of recovery, and I had to pump, like not a lot was coming out, pump as much as I could, and like get him back onto feeding, and then try to start the whole thing over. Wow. And
how old was he at this stage?
He was 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
He was 23 days
old. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the look of a baby with like with a mask over his face, like after the surgery at 23 days, is like not pleasant. So
and poor you also.
Oh my
Can
God!
Just
it
acknowledge
was
how
really
terrifying, and totally traumatic.
It was really traumatic.
Really, it's so scary.
Yeah. So then I brought a different lactation consultant when he came home, and he was like a month old at this point. And she like put him on the scale, and then I fed him, and she put him on the scale again afterwards. Yeah. And he, after this long feed, had gained like 10 grams. He'd gotten in like 10 cc's of milk. And she was like, you need to supplement. And I'm like, but isn't it better for him to just be getting breast milk? And she said to me, first feed the baby. Yeah. And I still have chills. Like,
first feed the baby.
First feed the baby. And my heart sunk, because I was like, how did I not think of that? Like, why is that not the first thing that I'm thinking of? Obviously, first feed the baby. Like, I'm responsible for it. It doesn't matter if I'm breastfeeding him or not, if he's not fed, if he's not growing, if he doesn't have what he needs in order to thrive. And that, like, when you go to the hospital, when I went to the hospital and they're like, they labeled the baby like failure to thrive, that is like crushing and heartbreaking. Totally. And so so I started, she gave me these feeding tubes, and I started doing it's like a supplemental nursing system. So I started doing that with him, which was really, really challenging at the beginning. I ended up doing it with all 3 kids.
Oh, wow.
But
The feeding tube where it's like
where
attached
it's
to
attached
your
to
nipple.
your attached to your nipple,
Mhm.
and then so you're like stimulating
Right.
your breast at the same
Right.
time that you're supplementing.
Right.
And that there were like ups and downs with that, because they're like with the girls it had worked much better. It ended up working much better with him. Like there were times where he just realized all he had to do was just like suck from this little tube. And
He's clever.
he was, smart boy. With them, I like started from the beginning, so they never knew anything different. But there was this. I just remember like I was just really heartbroken about the whole thing, because I gave birth at the same time as a few other very good friends of mine, who all had the easiest time with breast. Like they were all they didn't have the easiest time, but they had the opposite problems. They were like, and then on the other breast, they're like, soaking through the shirt, and I'm like, share some of your milk with me. And I remember like just like when he was 6 weeks old, just having this like, just sobbing, like just being so sad that I had this like. That I'm like messing with bottles, that I'm like I wanted to be one of these moms who just goes and like takes the baby and feeds him, and that's it. And then like pull out my boob and do what I have to do, and then like move on. Instead I'm like walking around with bottles and like first feeding, and then trying to do this thing with the tube, and then like feeding him from the bottle. And then my whole life was about feeding, just like all about feeding. Until I have 3 sisters. I have 3 brothers, but I have 3 amazing sisters-in-law, and I talked to them. And until I read this article, which you've probably read, The Atlantic.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact,
Which
I
is
think we posted it a while. In fact, somebody recently asked me to like repost it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like, all the benefits of breastfeeding are a bit overstated. Like it's great.
Yes,
but the
they
health
are a bit
benefits
exaggerated. It's like one less ear infection.
Yeah.
That's like what it comes down to.
And
ladies, like that's what we're talking about.
This boy ended up having so many ear infections that one less would have made a difference. That he ended up having tubes. So
funny.
Yeah. No, and I ended up breastfeeding him until he was, like, he got breast milk until he was 8 months old.
Right.
And then he stopped on his own. And my girls, they ended up going until they were 13 months old.
Wow.
But always always supplementing. Anyway, I read this article, and it was like, it really like put things in order for me.
Yeah.
And it made a lot of sense. I don't remember who told me to read it, or I think maybe my mom was like, why don't you do some research on this? Like, this is what you do. You're like a researcher. Like, do some research on this. And so I looked into it, and like that kind of helped me to like take the emotion out of it a little bit. Like even, and just like intellectualize the whole thing a little bit, and say, wait, why are you driving yourself crazy?
Yeah.
It doesn't actually matter that much. Like, you can bond with your baby through a bottle. And there are beautiful things about bottle feeding.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is like not, this does not define who
mother,
you are as a mother.
Right.
And it does not define what kind of relationship you're going to have with your child.
Absolutely.
So, and it's true, it didn't. And I have very close relationships with all 3 of my kids, and all 3 of them got a combination of breast milk and formula.
Right.
And I stayed home with them for different amounts of time also, and I still have good relationships with all of them. But you put so much into this one thing at this early stage of the kid's life, when like, what do kids need most? Like, probably just like hugs, and to be loved, and to be given a lot of kisses. And when they get a little older, to be stimulated and to be talked to and to be read to. Yeah. And like,
and for you to be like in a calm
and
place.
This whole thing of like what kind of milk they're getting is just, I just feel like it it's really overblown. And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, the concept of fed is best. I like the first time I heard that, I was just like, I felt like I was a little bit heartbroken because it didn't occur to me. And I think so many women have this like, we're pushed to believe
Right.
like
This ideal
you must breastfeed,
this
and
is
people
the
look
golden
at you. Like,
standard.
I was like, aren't people? I'm out in like a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And people are staring at me because I'm bottle feeding this tiny little baby, and like I know they think that I'm supposed, and they're probably not even looking at me. But like I in my head, I'm like they think I should
The judgment
be giving,
and the shame and the
exactly. And I felt just so much shame about, like, I felt like I was a failure as a mom because I was not producing enough milk.
Yeah.
And I was producing, my reduction was only on one breast, and I was producing more milk in that breast than in the other one.
Oh my God, that's fascinating.
It was really,
wow,
really crazy.
Right.
And my mom said to me afterwards, she's like, well, maybe you were supposed to only feed from that breast. Or maybe the lactation consultant said that to me. But, so anyway, so that was like, that's like the story that really was very formative in my experience. And with my girls, I knew that I was going to try again, but I did it in a very different way, in the sense that I was like, let's try for the first month, and then let's try for the next month, and not set any long-term goals, and not say I need to feed them for a year,
This
or
is like
I need to feed them for 6
exclusively
weeks.
breastfeeding for a year.
Yeah.
Which is like the World
I
Health
did
Organization's
with some delusion,
standard.
think that maybe it was going to be totally different with them, and it was. It was easier with each one. It was a little bit easier, and I did get to a point after the supplementing for like a couple of weeks before I went back to work with each of them that I was maybe able to like exclusively breastfeed them along with like once they were supplementing. But it was like a couple of weeks through the whole thing, and I don't know. I don't think it matters. Like, I don't think they don't remember it. I don't even remember. And my youngest is 2, and I don't really remember.
So interesting. Wow, that's an incredible story. And you may have kind of shared this already, but is there one particular moment that when you think about your whole feeding experiences, that really kind of has stayed with you? That, like, when we talk about like infant feeding, like that's the moment that you kind of go back to?
I have a lot of moments that I think about. I already talked about 2 of them. The one where the lactation consultant said to me, first feed the baby. And the night where I was sitting and reading that article. Before we figured out what was going on with Ariel, I still remember this moment of like doing, like the doctor told me, doing the 10 minutes on each side. And then spending like a couple of hours with him just crying. And like holding him in the sling and singing to him, and like, trying to get him to fall asleep. And in hindsight, like just having this understanding, like the poor kid was just hungry. Like he was crying because he was hungry. And it was, obviously it was really confusing at that time, because we did, if we gave him a bottle, he would throw it up. Right. So we just didn't understand. But just those moments of like where suddenly you just have this understanding that the baby's life is hopefully going to be really, really long, and this is just like a blip on the radar, and all you have to do is make sure the baby gets like enough calories in his system. And thank God there's formula.
Right.
Like, thank God.
Yes.
That we don't have to, like,
Thank
I didn't have to send him to a wet nurse. Like,
Right.
like, thank God that there's this incredible scientific invention that, and it turned out when I heard later, my mom also, I was not exclusively breastfed.
Right.
My brothers were not exclusively breastfed.
Right.
My mom was given formula as a baby.
Yeah.
Like,
also mine. And she kept it a secret. Shame on you, Mom.
My mom didn't keep it a secret, but I didn't know beforehand. It was not something we talked about.
Right.
So
yeah, no, absolutely. praise to formula.
Yeah.
It can genuinely be a lifesaver.
It is. I can say for a fact with my kids that it's a lifesaver.
Yeah.
Like they, I think back, like, what if I had just like tried to like just have them feeding all the time, but babies need to sleep also, and they can't, like, even if you're like trying to get them up to speed with a low milk supply,
Right.
like they need enough strength in order to feed.
Absolutely.
You have to have something to give them. Yeah.
And this is something that I think we as kind of first time moms also don't like appreciate, but we also need to kind of take care of ourselves. And if we get to a point, and I don't know, but I can just imagine that you must have been like, it must have been really hard for you to kind of watch your baby and not know how to feed him, and the feelings that you mentioned of kind of like shame. And I know those were feelings that I felt, huge feelings of shame and incompetency and things like that. And once I was also able to kind of get through that hurdle of like, what's the important thing here, formula so that he can be fed, then I was able to kind of like compose myself and kind of like, take a breath.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we also get caught up and we kind of forget that this is a moment. This is a moment in what hopefully will be a long and healthy life.
And I think it's like something that I really personalized also, like that I took it as a failing of my own. Like, this is what every woman's body is supposed to be able to do. Why am I unable to produce this milk? Like, how am I failing? Like, I felt like I was failing, and I'm this perfectionist, and I try to be successful at everything that I do. Right. And here, this was something that was just beyond my control. Yeah. And I absolutely tried to control it as much as possible, like I still tried, but this was beyond my control. Yeah. There was nothing I could do. Yeah. Yeah. And like, and I think just knowing that this is not something that it comes easily to everyone. Right. You see so many women for whom it does come easily, and that's great for them, and it's really, really wonderful for them. But it's important to know that it's not easy for everybody. Right. And that there are alternatives. I found for me there are different names for it in different countries, but they call it like supply line feeding and supplemental nursing, the tube feeding. Yeah. There are like full Facebook groups that are dedicated to this. Like discovering these communities of people and knowing that it was not just me, that I was not like the sole, because in my experience, I had all my friends who were having such an easy time. And like knowing that I was not alone. Absolutely. Was really, really especially helpful.
At a time when I don't know, I mean, like for me, I like didn't even leave the house. So you anyway feel so secluded and so isolated and alone. And then you're just like, oh my God, everybody else is able to breastfeed except for me.
Well, and they can leave the house sooner than I can, because they can go out to a coffee shop and they don't have to like, mess and prepare whatever they have to prepare. And then breastfeeding, they don't have to like sit with a pillow and like try, to latch the baby in like 5,000 different positions. And
but we all have, I mean, I think also even the women that are successful, some of them also have struggles, and that's why it's so important that we share our struggles, and so that we all kind of know what's going on. And then my final question, Suzie, which is actually my favorite, is if you could go back, knowing all that you know, after healthy, beautiful babies, and all those experiences that you've kind of gained and insight and knowledge. If you could go back today, what would you tell first-time mom Suzie?
I don't know if I actually would have listened to this as first-time mom Suzie.
So many moms say that.
But I have a friend who just decided from the beginning that she was not going to breastfeed, and she just decided to bottle feed from the very beginning. And I don't know if I would have been like strong enough to do that, because I think it takes a lot of strength. But I think I would have told me that it's okay if you just want to bottle feed your baby. Yeah. Like that is totally, totally okay. Doesn't matter what other people say. Right. And it doesn't matter what it is. They're probably not even, everybody cares about themselves. Nobody's looking at you. Nobody cares. Everybody's focused on their own world. I think I would have told myself, like, just let it go.
Yeah.
Like, feed your baby in whatever way
Right.
it makes the most sense.
Yeah.
And if you just want to bottle feed your baby, don't worry about what it's going to do to your supply, and don't
Right.
worry about, like,
Yeah.
don't be so, obsessive about, like, this is the way you have to do it.
Right. Right. That's really sound advice. This whole story was really so important. Thank you so much for sharing, Suzie.
My pleasure.
Honestly, really. One question though that I did have was that, and my experience with Zach, at least my eldest, was that sometimes I wonder if our relationship now has been influenced by the fact that, we kind of had a rough start in terms of me feeding him, and whether some of our tensions, because I feel like with Lila, I don't have as many tensions, it's kind of easier, and I maybe it's a gender thing, maybe it's she's second born, maybe, I'm kind of more seasoned, but sometimes I wonder if it is maybe related to that tense time, and when I was so focused on kind of being able to feed him that I wasn't actually, feeding and tending to him,
Right.
In kind of a calm way. And I'm just wondering if you experienced anything similar.
So I think that, like, with my girls, I haven't thought about it. Like, the struggle wasn't as great with them. Like, I think I had the knowledge, and I knew
Right.
I knew what to expect a little more. So I don't attribute any of their behavior to this or their interactions with me. I'm sure there are other things that I've done along the way that have caused problems. But yeah, that's what, as my husband always says, just we have to make sure we save enough money for therapy.
For therapy,
later
for
on.
sure.
but I do sometimes think with my son about, like, the time that he had where he was clearly hungry, and where he was crying, and his needs were not being met, and does that create, like, what does that do over the long term? Like, does that give you a sense of insecurity, or does that, like, just make you not sure that you can get everything you need from your mom or from your parent?
Right.
And thank God, like, he's so confident, and so, but, like, he definitely had periods with, like, more anxiety and stuff like that, and then I was always thinking about that, and we probably screwed him up in other ways along the way, but today he's, like, this just amazing, like, smart, well-adjusted, confident kid. So I think that at the end of the day, like, it's all worked out, and I probably can't attribute anything to that time, but I do sometimes think, what did that period of just in that first month of his life, and also the surgery, like, what did that period of, like, crying for food and not getting it do to him, to his, like, development? But hopefully,
I'm sure that
we've made up
for it and then done other things. Amazing. Thank you, Suzie. Thanks so much.
Thank
for sharing
you.
This
This
with
is
us.
awesome, and thank you for what you do.
Oh, my pleasure. Hey, whatever I can do to help moms, really, so that they don't feel as, like, alone and ashamed as we did, because it's not necessary.
For sure. If this group had been around when I was in this stage, it would have been in a totally different place.
Same. Okay, so we hope, whichever mom or other person is watching has found, strength and been empowered by Suzie's story. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.